that were not answered during the debate, we'd like you to write them down. There's paper and pencil still up here for those of you who may not have gotten it when I handed it out. And then those questions, we're going to take a 10-minute break while you determine those questions. We're going to hand them to the moderator here, Jonathan, and then he will present the questions to either Glenn or Tim, all right, so that we can get those questions answered. But again, remember, this is strictly informational at this point in time, right? So that we do ask that you don't make any comments during the debate and listen, okay, and get some information. And we just appreciate everyone coming here, by the way. We think it's very important that you take an interest in your community. So thank you much.
And I'm doubling as a sound guy. So if you can't hear or if it's too loud, throw something, say something. It's pretty informal, but just let us know if the sound isn't good.
Thank you all. And thanks to Mark for the invitation. My name is Jonathan. I'll be moderating tonight. We have 3 minutes for the questions and 2 minutes for any responses. So we'll be keeping a close eye on the time here. And I have a stack of questions that I've been asked to go through. So I'd like to introduce, to my left, Tim Hall, Vice President of Empire Energy.
Thank you.
And Glenn Wall is a geology professor at JCC, Jamestown Community College. So if there aren't any other questions or any other things, I'm going to dive right into questions. Right into questions. Number one.
Actually, we're going to do a little intro.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. If you both want to introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Oh, no, not that kind. Just like position. 3 minutes to start before the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood. Sorry, we were negotiating this at the beginning. So I'm going to ask Tim, if that's all right, to start with a 3-minute position to explain your position on the practice of horizontal high volume fracturing.
Good evening. Thank you for everybody for showing up tonight. To say the least, it's a complicated subject. The fracking that everybody's talking about is definitely different than what everybody knows for the vertical wells in Medina, the stuff that exists around here now. It's definitely a larger scale operation. Along with being a larger scale operation, the returns to as far as production, gas produced, taxes that will be paid on the production, royalties that are going to be paid out to landowners. Everything is exponentially larger than it was. When all this first happened, started with the push for the townships to ban it. Since the time that started, Governor Cuomo has still decided not to let any of this fracking take place. So as it stands right now, it can't happen. There's been court cases that have decided that the townships do have the right to regulate it to an extent. If the company, if Cuomo was to decide tomorrow that it was okay to frack, this wouldn't be the area where everybody would start. And even if it was, the permitting process is estimated to take over a year by the time they get all the studies done that they have to do. You have to go out and check for the wetlands and be sure that what kind of vegetation is there, and if you have invasive species, you have to come up with plans to control that. You've got road use agreements that you have to work out with your townships, and you're going to be bonding the roads. Just pretty much anything you have to do. If you're going to have a site put together, you've got to come up with a plan for keeping the light so it doesn't bother people. You've got to show where you've attempted to situate the drill pads where it's going to be less visible from the roads. There's the regulations that the state has right now are about 1,500 pages long that pertain just to this. So there's not a whole lot that they haven't thought about. Some of it, I would agree with Glenn, probably, to the surprise of some people, that they didn't think about it as well as they should have. Some things they overthought. Um,
10 seconds.
10 seconds, thank you.
Okay, first of all, anything I say tonight, if you would like sources of information, links, etc., you can see me afterwards. I'd be glad to give you my email, and you can just email me and I'll send you whatever other information or additional information. Everything I say tonight does have sources, studies, government reports, etc. Tonight I'll be arguing against fracking, which would make it for a ban. And those are kind of the two things we're considering tonight. Is fracking a good idea? And also, would a town be wise to instill a ban or enact a ban? So I'm going to start out this way. Even if I was 100% for fracking, even if I thought it was the best idea in the world, I would still be in favor of towns enacting local bans. And here's why. One is, gas prices are going to be going up. They're at all-time lows now. They'll probably stay low for another year or so, at least, before they start rising. And it's the kind of thing like if you find a box of old gold in the attic, that maybe used to belong to your grandmother or something, do you sell it when you know the price is low and when you know the price is going to go up? Or do you hold on to it until the price rises? And that's kind of the situation that we'd be in here. And if Cuomo opens up for fracking, a town like Leon doesn't have control over it unless they have enacted a ban. Enacting a ban doesn't say anything politically, it says that you've enacted a ban. And bans could be rescinded when the town thought the time was right. So to me that would be a good reason for a town to enact a ban. Another good reason is we found over in Chautauqua County that 75% of the leases are these old leases. And that if fracking were to come in, the landowners would kind of get the shaft. They would get the minimum royalty, they get no signing bonus, they wouldn't have a chance to propose and enact any protections for their land, other than what the regulations stated. And so by having a ban, it also gives both time and motivation for these old leases to be renegotiated, so that both the town could get better revenue and the landowners could get better revenue as well. Number three, local control. All of us are always talking about how good small government is and how we wish we could take control from Washington, D.C. or Albany. Here's a chance where a town can do that. Right now, Albany is control over when and if this happens, but if a town like Leon enacted a ban, like 180 other towns in New York already have, then that control becomes local instead of keeping it in Albany. One of the things I'll be presenting tonight are correlational studies that do show environmental and health impacts from fracking. And we have more studies coming in, causational studies and more comprehensive studies. And that would also give the town time for them to look at those things and decide for themselves, rather than having somebody else decide, is this a good idea for us to let this in? And that's it.
So, it's all right. I'm just going to ping pong back and forth and give Tim the first crack at the next question. This is question number 1 from tonight's prepared questions. So the new process of hydrofracking, otherwise known as high volume horizontal drill or high volume hydrofracking, has been reported to require large amounts of water. Some reports are from 2 to 8 million gallons per well. Is this accurate? And there's a series of questions, so I'm going to need you to just bear with me here. Is this an accurate representation? 2 to 8 million gallons per well. Where would that water come from? Would the volume of water used affect access to clean water? And what problems are there from dedicating this resource of water to the industrial process? And how can we be sure that our area won't have problems with our water supply? So that's a lot of questions in number 1.
Okay. Let's see, to begin with, 3 to 8 million gallons is the correct number. It depends on just how long the laterals are. The variable to that anymore is that a majority of companies take all of the flowback fluid and they use it in the next frac. So it's not, when you drill a pad of wells, you drill 6, 8, 10 wells, whatever you're going to put on a pad. You drill your first well, you're going to flow it back, you're going to have some return. That water gets filtered and gets used on the next well. So it's not that every well uses 2 to 8 million gallons. It actually uses 2 to 8 million gallons. Whatever the flow back is in there, every well, the amount that they flow back is different. So it still is a lot of water by any means. Let's see, where's the water going to come from? Before you can get a permit issued to drill one of these wells, you have to have a detailed plan about where you're going to get your water from. If it's going to be taken from a stream or a pond or a lake, there's, and I've got copies of it here, same thing, it's part of the, I mentioned SGEIS is what the state calls their environmental, the regulations that are going to govern this. You have to go through and you have to figure the low flow rates, and it takes engineers to do it. You've got to do that. You can't go below a certain point where they've determined that it's going to affect the fish that might be in the stream or wetlands, any of that. Every place that you're going to take water from has to be in your permitting process, has to have all the studies to go along with this. It's part of what's going to take over a year from the time you want to drill before when you start the process to apply for the permitting. So nobody can walk or come up to the stream, stick a hose in the stream and suck the water out. You have to, and they track it. So you have to document where everything comes from and where everything goes. The other part about it is that when the gas that's produced, when the chemical reactions that happens when you burn the natural gases, it produces water. So yes, it does take you the 3 to 8 million gallons to frack a well, but if you use the average production you're getting out of a well in Pennsylvania, when you burn the gas from that well in 1 year, it's going to produce 11 million gallons of water back into the environment. It's going to go into the atmosphere. It's part of the chemical reaction. So when you get all said and done, these wells are net generators of water into the environment.
Thank you very much, Tim. And Glenn?
Generally, I would agree. Out of 40-something problems with fracking, the water access and usage, at least in our area, a state like New York, is way down the list as far as how problematic it is. But about 75% of the fracking occurs in states where water isn't as plentiful as it is here. And there are farmers fighting frackers out in California and Texas and several other places. But fortunately, we have a lot of water. And as Tim said, it'll come from streams, rivers, lakes, etc. And one of the questions was, could it affect how much water we have for other uses? One wouldn't think that it would, but I think one of the things we have to remember is the scale of this. As Tim correctly said, this isn't the kind of gas and oil drilling that we're used to. It's not like a few trucks come in, drill one well, and use a few tens or perhaps even hundreds of thousands of gallons of water. We're talking typically 6 million gallons of water for each of these things. They can't drill just one well. They have to put many wells on a pad, they have to put many pads in an area, and so whenever this new kind of fracking happens, in order for it to be economic, unless gas prices go way, way up, but right now, for it to be economic, they have to have a pretty massive industrial operation to get all that infrastructure. So you're talking about thousands of truck trips of water, etc. And you wouldn't think it would affect how much water is available for other things, but down in Tioga County, Pennsylvania, which is similar to us as far as rainfall, etc., they actually started running out of water. The fracking was that intensive. And the companies contracted with the town of Painted Post, New York, a 5-year contract to withdraw up to 1 million gallons a day from the village aquifer. And they're having some issues right now, some lawsuits, because there are other people outside the village on this aquifer, and they're concerned that their water is going to run out because the village is pumping so much out as a municipal sale kind of thing. So there's tons of issues that kind of mesh in with the main issue of fracking. And one of them certainly is how we treat water. Is it this free thing that you pull out of the ground from your water well? Or is it this thing that now is a commodity and private companies end up taking more control over it? But yeah, certainly the water usage is not a gigantic deal compared to the other things. More importantly is what happens to the water after it's used, after it's contaminated. How do you dispose of it, et cetera, et cetera.
All right. Thank you both. And move on to the next question, number 2. Pollution is always a concern, and since there are many toxic chemicals associated with the hydrofracking process, what eventually happens to these chemicals? Are they allowed to enter into our water and air? And what safeguards or assurances are in place to protect us from the chemicals, and are these adequate? So I'll turn it over to Tim.
Again, before you can get a permit, you have to have a detailed plan telling everybody where and how you're going to handle any flowback water or drill cuttings, wherever it is. They have to go to a specified place that is regulated to handle that waste. As it stands right now, there is no injection well in New York State that's permitted to handle this waste, so none of it would end up in New York State. There's no waste treatment plants that are permitted to handle the liquid waste. None of that would end up in New York State as it stands now. And I can't imagine that there's any way anybody would get a permit to put an injection well in New York State. So the waste, whatever it is, there's a treatment plant in Warren that handles some of it. There's places in Ohio that get rid of it. The waste, that part of the waste wouldn't be here.
I'm sorry, Tim? Could you expand on what injection well means as opposed to a natural gas well?
Okay. An injection well is a well that's specifically designed and set up to take fluids. They can use brine water or the flowback water or traditional frac water. The flowbacks after the frac, they would take it and they would inject it back into the ground, the same basic formation that it came out of. It's just a method of getting rid of the waste. It comes with its own set of issues. Some people don't like it, some people do. See, what do we look at? Air emissions, everything that you've got, the engines that you use when you're doing your frac, everything is in this 1,500 pages. The state stipulates what engines you are allowed to use on your equipment that you have in there. It has to be the cleanest technology. If you end up setting a compressor site, every piece of anything that's going to have emissions into the air is regulated by the EPA. It has to be permitted by the EPA. Right now they're changing over, so there used to be the crews that did the fracking used diesel trucks to do it. Those are all changing over now. They're switching their crews over, so they're actually burning natural gas to do the frac, so you don't have the emissions was always a big issue for everybody from the cluster of vehicles and things. So that's part of the technology that's changing. Also, you have to have leak detection and a repair program as part of your permitting process. So before you can get a permit issued to you, you have to come up with a program that spells out how you're going to respond to leaks, how you're going to take care of them, the maintenance. All that stuff has to be done before.
President, take a few more. Could you ask?
The other part that, I'll say one small thing, the other part that you're going to have with these wells is these wells, as the regulations have them now, are required to have extra layers of pipe in the hole and cement, more than the Medina wells that you've got around here. And they also have to run a log that goes down in it, and it's a bond log, and it measures for voids between the pipe and the formation, so that you know you've got a good cement seal in there. All those are requirements that you don't have in the wells, Medina wells that you see here.
Thank you.
I'm not sure how much you know about the basics, but each well, in addition to that 6 million or so gallons of water that we were talking about, also needs several, typically 100 tons of sand as a proppant to keep the cracks open after the fracking process. And each well also typically needs somewhere between 100 and 400 tons of chemicals. Some of these chemicals are very benign. There's not much toxicity to them. But a few studies have taken a look at the 600 plus chemicals that can be used. Now certainly they don't use that many in one frac, but out of the menu of chemicals they do use, roughly 50% are toxic. Neurotoxins, mutagens, teratogens, endocrine disruptors, carcinogens. And so these certainly are chemicals that we have to be very careful of. And despite all the regulations, I mean, every single state says, our state has the toughest regulations, we have the best oversight. And yet every single state that has fracking right now has issues with oversight, regulations, and pollution from the fracking operations. Also, it's not just the chemicals that we put down that we have to worry about. Because first of all, as Tim said, when you put the frac fluid down, some of it comes back up as flowback, but some of it stays down there as well. And so even though we don't have any deep well injection in New York State as a disposal system, every single fracked well is a disposal well also, because some of those chemicals stay down there. And they stay down there unmonitored. There's no conclusive evidence yet that there can't be migration, either lateral or vertical. And even though that's not a sure thing that there is, it's also not a sure thing that there isn't. We just don't know enough about that yet. But in addition to the chemicals we put down, there's also some things in those shales that we really don't want to bring up. In fact, the way they find the black shales is due to its radioactivity. You essentially lower a Geiger counter down, and when the gamma count is high, you're at the black shale layer.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry. And so when you do get flowback, in addition to the chemicals that you put down, you also get back heavy metals, arsenic, selenium, in addition to radioactive materials. And Tim was right as far as we don't allow any more to bring liquid waste into the state for processing at waste treatment plants. We do have solid waste. The filtering that he talked about as far as recycling the water, we have drill cuttings and sludge that are deposited in New York State landfills. And right now, the Highland landfill in Angelica and the Chemung landfill, the leachate from that is running 9 to 14 times higher than background radioactivity, and it's trending upwards. So we're certainly finding that these chemicals are causing pollution issues. Do I have any time? Or? Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure. There's all sorts of different things to talk about. One is the cement jobs that Tim was talking about aren't all that sturdy. In fact, many studies have found that typically the failure rate is 6% and plus, and that's initially, and it gets much worse as it gets much older. One of the reasons for this, and this is again a difference between conventional and unconventional extraction, is that with a vertical well, with conventional extraction, you get just a very little bit of vibration. With multi-stage fracking, you get a lot, and that seems to really mess up our cement jobs. So they leak more often than old ones.
I'm going to use this. It's not quite as loud. So we're going to change timer technology here. Next question. We've talked about, so far, just to recap, we've talked about how much water, what the impact of water is on the environment and the use of it and how it's regulated, concerns about pollution. We'd like to move on to regulation. Are there sufficient and effective regulation and oversight in place for hydrofracking activity? And are regulatory agencies such as the EPA or DEC able to protect our water, air, and ground from contaminants?
Okay, yes, am I going to get a chance, because some of these things here, I think I'm going to further battling out, but maybe at the end or whenever, I mean, it's fine.
You can do it now.
I'm sorry, so
Well, it's just some of the comments that you made that I think they need a bit more clarification.
Right, so we can put 2 minutes on and ask for responses if that's all right with people. And if everyone agrees, we can have a back and forth right now, because Tim would like to respond to some propositions that Glenn made. If there are any concerns, I'm going to give 2 minutes to Tim and let him respond.
Okay. First, back to the painted post example that Glenn used. Painted post was already permitted to pull over, it was well over the 1 million gallons more from the source water than what they were using. So the painted post was already taking it, they already had existing permits in place so that they could take more water. The problem they had with it was when they started taking the water, the people that were opposed to fracking said, hey, don't be taking the water. So it's not like Painted Post was trying to take an additional 1 million gallons or whatever the number was a day. They were working with the permits that they had and pulling the volumes of water that they were permitted to have. So people had an issue with where it was going. Back to the last one, gotta go quick. The pollution part of it. Glenn used 400 tons of chemicals. I've spent hours going through completion records. I haven't found any that uses 400 tons of chemicals. 80 tons seems to be, which is still a lot, but it's not 400 tons. Difference you're going to have in New York State is talking about the chemicals that are going to be in the flowback water. In New York State, you don't have open pits. You have to flow back into containers. The flowback fluid does not come back onto the ground. Your well site is diked. It's got containment on the whole site. The tanks, they come back and flow into steel tanks. There's nowhere that stuff is just setting open so it can spill. Things could happen, absolutely, but it's the rules that New York has in place are much more stringent than some of the other places. As far as a well that's completed being unmonitored, I would tell you that a well that somebody spent a few $1 million on is going to be one of the most monitored wells that you ever want to see. I really wouldn't. That's my 2 minutes.
Yeah, could I just take a second to respond?
Yeah.
Yeah, Tim, you're really not disagreeing with me, I don't think. The painted post thing matches up exactly what I said, that they were taking 1 million out for the fracking, and that people were concerned that their water was going to run out. But I think the key point on that was that Tioga County, Pennsylvania, for some reason, was running short on water and had to get it from elsewhere. And when we were talking about unmonitored wells, I wasn't talking about the well itself, I was talking about the frac fluid that they leave down there. We don't monitor that, and we don't know how to monitor that. Okay, that's it.
Very good. And we'll move on to our next question.
Yes.
Next question is concerning oversight.
Shall I reread it for everyone's sake? I'm sorry, just to refresh. Question number 3, are there sufficient effective regulation oversight in place for hydrofracking activity, and are regulatory agencies such as EPA and DEC able to protect our air, water, and ground from contaminants?
Same thing within the 1,500 pages of regulations. It's in there, the DEC is not allowed to issue a permit for more wells than they have the staff to oversee. It's part of the conditions that the regulations and the DEC has to follow before they can have a permit. If they don't have the people on staff, they can't allow a permit to go through. The roads that we use are regulated by the DOT, both New York State and federal. All the drivers and regulations you have to follow. Those are the organizations that oversee us. The other ones that we have to deal with, and these are all things that you have to work with while you're permitting. You have to identify how you're going to work with these different groups. You've got the EPA, you've got OSHA, the Public Service Commission, you got the DEC Minerals Division, the DEC Environmental Permits Division, the DEC Division of Water, DEC Remediation, DEC Minerals Management, DEC Fish, Wildlife, Marine Services, DEC Air Resources. The New York State Department of Health, the New York State Conservation Police, the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, county health departments, local townships, local counties.
Released a scathing report on how Pennsylvania really hasn't done a good job with oversight. They haven't answered landowners and water well owners' complaints in a timely manner. They haven't made companies clean up pollution as much as they should. They certainly haven't inspected, they haven't inspected the wells like they should. There's a whole list of things that the Auditor General found are lacking in Pennsylvania for this. So even though I love the idea that, oh yeah, we have 1,500 pages of regs, and that's going to keep us safe, it hasn't worked in these other states. So I'm a little concerned about that. Plus, even with those 1,500 pages, New York never looked at the health impacts. It developed a plan how to dispose of billions of gallons of the waste as far as the overall picture. Certainly did on the small scale, but not the big scale. So yeah, regulations, nice, but they don't always work.
Quick response. My response to that is going to be, we operate about, responsible for 2,000 wells. I work in New York State and I work in Pennsylvania, and I can absolutely guarantee you that the regulations, the enforcement, the oversight in New York State is way more stringent than Pennsylvania, even without the extra layers of regulations that they're putting on for these wells. So yeah, I absolutely would agree that when Pennsylvania first started letting all of this drilling take place, they weren't prepared for what was going to happen to them. That's one of the good things that has come out of this delay, is that enough people have had a chance to sit back, analyze where the issues have been, and respond to them.
So we move on to question number 4 here. So question number 4 was, what is the short and long-term economic impact of the hydrofracking process for a community that chooses to allow this activity? Is it good or bad for some or everyone in the community? Are there increased expenses to local residents and their government? And are those expenses compensated for?
Definitely, there's short and long-term benefits. To begin with, you're going to have jobs. Your taxes are going to go down. Long-term, you're going to have jobs, and your taxes are going to be down. It's not just going to be people out there on the frac crew. You've got, if you're going to have to build a pad, you're going to have a contractor that is going to be building the pad. You're going to need the gravel. You're going to need someplace. There's people that started up laundry services because the people that work out of town in the frac crews, they don't have a way to. There's just the number of jobs that spring off from this are numerous. I got to go really quick here. Wear and tear on the roads are definitely a concern. You've got road use agreements that you have to have with the townships and the counties before you can get your permit. It's part of the regulations before you do it. Every road that you work on has to be bonded, always has been. So if you destroy the road, you've got a bond there to take care of it. It doesn't make any sense. If you do a $50 million development and you tear up $100,000 worth of township road, do you really want to tick off the township for $100,000 and not be able to get to your $50 million? I mean, just common sense tells you, think about that. Direct economic impact. This is, I ran some numbers in the town of Leon. And this would be, I picked a piece of Leon that was Cattaraugus Valley School District. The impact for somebody with a $100,000 assessment, they drill one of these wells and it produces for a year. Every town resident's taxes go down $400. A 6-well pad, which is probably the minimum that you would ever see here, was going to bring everybody down about $2,000 on a $100,000 assessment. Doesn't matter where the well's on your property, where you are. The only thing that's going to be different here is if, I think Leon split up like 3 or 4 school districts take out. So it depends on where the school tax part of it may change those numbers. So there's a financial benefit to each and every member of a township where one of these wells are drilled. The royalties are from one of these wells. I took the first 5 years. They start out, they produce a lot of gas the first year. The first 5 years they taper off, and then it kind of reaches a plateau. If you're using Pennsylvania as a model to work from, nobody's drilled here, so we don't know exactly what it's going to be. Over those first 5 years, the royalties from one well is $100,000. That's for one well. That's money that gets put back into there. It's income for people. People are going to be paying taxes on it. They're going to be hiring carpenters to rebuild their houses, buying new tractors, buying new, whatever it is. It's money that's going to go back into the economy. Absolutely. The shale development. Everybody that's heating with natural gas right now, their natural gas bill is approximately 20% lower because of shale drilling, because of the quantity of gas. It definitely has driven the price of gas down. The drop you're seeing in the price of gasoline is directly related to the development of shale and hydraulic fracturing. The alternative that everybody, they're saying, we don't want to do, in New York State, no hydrocarbons. We don't want everything green. That would amount to almost, they want 5 million rooftop solar systems put in. There's 12,700 offshore wind towers that they want put up. 1,910 wave generating devices. They want 387. Can I just finish this? Yeah. They want 387 concentrated solar power plants. And it's going to take 327 square miles of land to be cleared and have solar panels put on it to do these things. This is a proposal that they have. It's on paper. This is what they want instead of using fossil fuels.
Just for clarity, hydrocarbon is a nice way of using a shortcut to describe all gas, oil,
gas,
any
oil,
number of carbon fossil fuels. Hydrocarbon is a good synonym. Just want to clarify that.
Yeah, thank you.
Tim, just 2 real fast questions before I launch in. Your $100,000 royalty on one well?
Yes, sir.
12%?
Yes, these numbers that I put here, I scaled down what they said the production of the wells were going to be. I used as low a numbers as I could.
Thank you. And second, the they that you spoke about, as far as they want to do this with solar, et cetera, who's the they?
The they is Tony and Graffia and Howard. And that's the they.
And do you believe they're representative of everybody?
No, I believe they're representative of the people that are on YouTube with them.
Okay, thanks. All right, and the question after this gets into jobs too, so I'm going to speak more to the economic issues. And certainly, this is one area where hydraulic fracturing can say, yes, we do improve the economy. The question is, how is it improved? How long does it last, etc.? Does it help everybody? And certainly the answers aren't quite as rosy. First of all, a year ago this month, there was a multi-state shale research collaborative that did a very large study on the economics. And they found out that, first of all, it was a 6-state study, essentially most of the states that were heavily fracked at that time. And they found that job numbers were generally fairly exaggerated by the industry. That where the industry predicted 31 new jobs per well, that actually it came out to about 4 to 5 new jobs per well. And so generally they were finding, and the industry has to do this for their investors. They have to, like most industries do, they have to kind of hype up their own activities. So really it's a little bit rosier than it says. And keep in mind that when this happens, as we said, it's a very large scale thing. You get a gigantic influx of people, and most of the high-paying jobs the industry brings in from out of state or outside of the area. The people that get the local jobs, the direct ones, are mostly truck driving for water and for flowback, and other relatively unskilled things in addition to truck driving. Most of the higher ones would be for people that they bring in. And so when you're talking about the jobs, that's one issue. The other part of all that is that you get this influx of people that you have to accommodate. And that's where an indirect benefit that Tim didn't really mention comes up. You know, certainly the motels increase, the restaurants increase. A lot of these ancillary type businesses do better because of that. The problem is, once the area has been fracked, those people go away. It's definitely a boom and bust kind of process. This isn't where you bring in a factory and you get 100 jobs and those 100 jobs stay year after year after year after year. This is where you get a fairly short-term influx of money and then the money goes away. And so that's certainly, you know, if you're thinking about having fracking brought into a town, that's certainly something that has to be part of your planning. How do we plan to build up, and then how do we plan to build down? How do we plan to go back to normal? And we'll talk about some of the other issues when you have that kind of influx of workers into an area. Again, we look at Pennsylvania because they tend to be our closest neighbor that's doing a lot of fracking. Oops, I'll stop now. I'll hit these points later on. Or is it a call?
Would you like to respond?
Yeah,
to
just,
okay. Go ahead.
Glenn's right. And if you had a factory, the factory would be here and be producing. People would be working for years and years and years to come. No offense to the town of Leon, but I don't know. I live in the town of Chautauqua. I don't know too many factories that are going to Leon. So for somebody to sit up here and tell somebody that may be looking for a job or need a way to support their family or want to be able to have their kids around here to say, hey, you know, we've got this industry that's coming in. The jobs may only last you for 5 years. You may keep going like I have, made a career out of it. To say that you shouldn't do this because your job's only going to last for 5 years and you should hope for a factory to come in and get it. To me, it's kind of convoluted. If you don't have an opportunity for employment for people, you know, anything is better than what you're going to have. It's going to keep your families here. And like I said, I work with 40 people every day. It's a living. It's the way we make our living.
Right, and again, we're talking conventional versus unconventional too.
But there's not.
You've been able to do it this long because it's conventional. If it was unconventional, you'd have to go from one place to another place to another place.
But well, the only thing I would say about that would be that if we never drilled any more wells from the time that I started working in it, yeah, they'd be gone. And the jobs wouldn't be here. We'd continue to drill.
Okay, but well, we'll hit the other stuff later.
If it's all right with both gentlemen, I'm going to swap and ask Glenn to go first on the next question, so we can go back and forth a little bit. Number 5, the 5th question was: Are there many new opportunities for employment in an area that allows the hydrofracking process to take hold? Are they typically jobs that locals can fill, or are the workers imported? And will any new employment be short-term or last for a long term? So I think we've sort of covered this, but...
Yeah, we did in a way. So this can be kind of a continuation of the last one as well. And what I said does hold still true. The Keystone Research Center found those same exact kinds of statistics as far as the type of jobs that are offered, who gets them, whether it's locals or transients brought in from out of state, etc. One of the other things that a community would have to consider, and the state should be considering too, as far as whether to open up for fracking, is the impact on existing employment. We have right now, I'm not sure if any of you even realize this, we have a company from Texas called Crestwood that is trying to expand the gas storage facility on the west side of Seneca Lake. There are many people in other businesses that don't like this idea because they've seen what has happened in Kansas and Louisiana at a similar geologic structure where the caverns, that used to be salt caverns by the way, where they mined it, and the salt caverns had structural problems and they collapsed. And there are several geologists that have warned against expanding this at Seneca Lake, etc. The company's engineers have signed off saying it's safe, but anyway, a lot of local people are fighting this, and there's been close to 100 arrests already at the Crestwood gates. They're trying to block it to keep it from expanding. Many municipalities in the area have voted to denounce Crestwood's plans. But the interesting thing to me is who's blocking this. You know, these aren't the typical kind of protesters. These are local business people. There are over 60 winery owners that have signed on against this. And in fact, if you go to central New York, at a lot of wineries and businesses, you'll see banned fracking signs all over the place because they know that their business, as well as breweries, distilleries, organic farms, etc., depend on clean water and clean air. And so you're getting a lot of opposition to fracking, and specifically to this Crestwood proposal, because of the impact that it could have on other kinds of businesses. In New York State, we have a $4.5 billion a year winery industry. We have a $60 billion a year tourism industry. And those are the kinds of industries that the people in the Finger Lakes, specifically for Crestwood, but more generally for fracking, excuse me, that they're trying to protect their water and their air because they know in the long run it's going to be more expensive. They might get the money from this revenue from this, but it's going to also add costs to them, both for loss of other types of employment and for other types of environmental and health costs that we can talk about later as well. Okay.
That I mentioned earlier, some job of one fashion or another, where it may not be something that somebody can be at for the rest of their lives. It's not a bad thing. And to say that you shouldn't have an industry in because it's not going to give somebody a lifetime job. You know, I don't know of many wineries in the town of Lincoln. I don't know of, you know, that's just, he's right in the Finger Lakes. There's a different deal up there. It really does not apply to you. As far as people having jobs and the dollar amounts, when you first come in with something, whether you're drilling or you're fracking or bringing any industry that you want to bring in, the people that you've got here local to hire aren't going to be the people that have the expertise that you need to do that job. The only way you get the experience is to get on the job, to work as a worm on a rig and work your way up and learn. That's where you have the opportunity. That's where you have the opportunity to work. And once they get done, if the rigs move somewhere else and you choose to, you've learned a career, you can go where the rigs are. Or you could stay here. The other thing that would help immensely would be if the colleges would have classes and courses that would help train people to work on the frac jobs and the wells. I've got, we've had about, I think it's just shy of 20% of our employees in the past year and a half have left our company to go down to Pennsylvania to work. They came and they worked for us out in the field. They took their safety classes. They got the experience that they needed to go apply for the jobs, and they were way ahead of a lot of other people. If the colleges could have a program where they could train the kids once they come out of high school for these jobs, you know, if New York ever opened up, they'd be working here. If not, they'd have a head start on everybody else in Pennsylvania. Colleges, to be quite honest with you, don't want to touch it because is what's going to happen when you have a class in a college that's teaching the kids how to work in the oil and gas industry. There's going to be people just driving them nuts with protests, and they just this whole topic has gone so screwy that people are afraid to even touch it, and it's sad for our young kids. I've got kids that I'd love to have them have a job and be able to stay around here. I don't know what's going to happen.
Thank you, Tim. We'll move on to the next question. I'm sorry, question number 6. Does the introduction of high-volume hydrofracking into an area have a significant effect on its community and culture? Will truck traffic or crime rates increase if hydrofracking comes here? And I'll turn that over to Tim.
Yeah, definitely there's going to be a big impact on as far as truck traffic. Absolutely will be if the fracking were going to be here. Part of the things that have changed since you had the number of truck trips that everybody talks about is when they figure the trips in and out, they're figuring about trucking all this, 2 to 8 million gallons of water in, getting the flowback fluid, trucking it out, trucking in another 2. That's old time. That doesn't happen anymore. Like I said, the flowback fluid is used on the site, and they put pipelines in to pump the fresh water to the drilling locations, as opposed to trucking everything in with water. Saves on road use, keeps the townships happier, keeps residents happier. It saves the companies money. It's just the way, it's the standard now. The socioeconomic concerns are also something that's addressed in the 1,500 pages of regulations from New York State. You have to have in there, your pad location has to be referenced as to the impact that it's going to have on the neighbors, the neighborhood. How you have your lighting is dictated to you so that it doesn't shine on people, that, you know, the houses and buildings. You have to be away from buildings. You have to camouflage or disguise equipment. There's 27 pages in the regulations that are devoted just to issues like this. Part of it is when you have to present road use plans in your permitting process. You can't be on the roads when you have school buses running. You can't be on the roads when there's going to be public, if you've got like the fair or something like that, that would be something that would be off limits for truck traffic when that was on. All those things are considered. You have to do, before you can use the roads in the townships, the drilling company is obligated to come in and do a baseline survey of all the roads. The assumption is that townships don't have the money to do that. The driller's going to use the roads, they ought to do it. So that's part of the regulations, is before they come in, they have to do the survey on the roads. If a road's not up to snuff, they have the option of rebuilding it, which is a standard that they do down in Pennsylvania. They do a lot of road work. Same thing, if you want to do a $50 million project, is $100,000 fixing the road to get to it a good idea? Probably makes sense. The noise is another thing. They've even got a regulation in there that says that you should have rubber-covered malls. So if you hit the pipe with the maul, it doesn't make too much noise and disturb everybody. There's just item after item after item that's in there, that so you have to address these. You have to think about the issues of how it's going to affect the local people on the roads. But it's there. Obviously, there's going to be some things that are missed, but it's not something that nobody's thought about. It's not a concern. Thank you.
Just tagging back real fast, when Tim was correct saying Leon doesn't have any wineries, I think he's correct, isn't he? At least not big scale ones. We have little ones in our garages, but Leon does have a pretty good tourism industry though. And despite whatever recycling goes on, you're still talking about thousands of truck trips. And I'm picturing that, I don't know how many people from Buffalo or wherever they're coming from want to do the Amish Trail when they have to compete with tanker trucks all the time. So again, these aren't long-term impacts, but they're certainly something to consider if you're considering whether to open up a place. Social impacts, to be fair, anytime you get a large influx of people, you're going to get social impacts. It's not peculiar to hydraulic fracturing, but certainly you're going to get an increase in a lot of the negatives. You're going to get a crime increase, you're going to get an increase in emergency service personnel calls, 911 calls, arrests, jails. you name it. All of those kinds of things go up. In North Dakota, they're having a large problem with, and hopefully this won't occur around here, but kidnapping and human trafficking of Native American women. Because again, you get a ton of people coming in with a lot of money, not much else to do when they're not working, and they tend to have some problems because of that. Again, these are things that happen anytime you get a large group of men together. That doesn't sound right either, does it? It doesn't. But it's generic, but it certainly isn't. It's not where the fracking business is immune to that, is what I'm saying. There was a study done a little over a year ago in Pennsylvania. They found that truck crashes were 19% higher in counties with intensive fracking. Disorderly conduct arrests up 17%. This is a strange one, but the local medical community reported that STD increases were 62% higher. Emergency room visits up, ambulance calls, 911 calls, jail occupancies, court schedules, etc. As far as some of the other impacts, one of the things that happens is because housing is at such a premium, rents go up. And what they find in some cases is that because the guys that are working get paid quite a bit, that local people sometimes have to move out. Either that or go on public assistance because now all of a sudden their rent has jumped way up, so the landlord can take advantage of this big influx, and they have a problem paying that. Other economic impacts, many studies have shown that generally property values go down if you have a gas lease and if gas drilling operations are happening near you. People have problems with mortgages. In fact, you are finding many lending institutions and mortgage institutions that don't allow mortgages if you have a lease. Insurance, home equity loans, all of those kinds of things happen. Was that? Okay.
Just two quick things. The standard down and once again, please guys, kind of hold your thoughts here while we're doing this. The standard down in Pennsylvania is for emergency services that companies are buying equipment for them. That's the standard that happens because they're aware of the fact that they don't have maybe don't have the equipment that they would need to handle the extra influx. So that's a standard that they would help out fire departments and do that. As far as mortgages being a problem, I can give you a whole bunch of places anybody can go to get a mortgage. The number of banks, I believe there's one bank that really has an issue with the giving mortgages where there's a well on the property. And outside of that, we've been able to work with anybody else.
Again, that's different than the data I have. A lot of banks and credit unions, etc., are having problems with that because of the property value decreasing. The collateral decreasing.
I mean, that's more of a routine thing for us. We get those calls in, properties changing hands and banks and mortgages. They're concerned about what's there and things, but once you explain what's going on, but there is one bank that definitely has an issue with that, for sure.
Thank you both. And we've gone we did both sides of that, right?
Fairly.
Fair enough for both people. You feel we've answered that question. This is the seventh and final question for this evening, and then we'll be taking questions. If you care to write your questions down on a piece of paper, there's a pencil and paper up here provided, and we'll read through questions from the audience after this last question. We're going to take a 10-minute break, I believe, let people write out questions if they still have some time to think about it, and then we'll read those. So we're at 8 o'clock. We're going to try and wind up around 9, the latest, I think. Is that? Yeah. So this is the last question for this evening for prepared questions. Property rights are always a concern of citizens and taxpayers, and no one wants their ability to do what they want to do or need to do to be needlessly infringed. As various governing bodies decide to limit, control, regulate, or ban certain activities, ideally it should be more to provide the protection of rights than to limit them. So is this new type of hydrofracking gas extraction a right that individuals have, or is it an activity that infringes on the rights of others in the surrounding area? Really not be affected by the industry if they choose not to be. Does that make sense to both of you?
Yeah.
So I'll turn it to Tim.
My personal belief on this is that I think the landowner has a right to the property. They pay for the property. They pay their taxes every year. And they pay the upkeep on the property. My personal opinion is that as long as the development's done in a responsible manner, your property, you have every right to try to get the resources up from underneath it that's there. Again, that's just my personal opinion. As far as eminent domain is concerned, it's not a factor. Oil and gas companies have no rights of eminent domain. The only people that have rights of eminent domain are going to be municipalities and a utility company. So they can't just come in and say, hey, we're taking your property or we're doing whatever. The forced pooling applies when somebody doesn't want to have a lease on their property, and 65% of the property that it would take to make the drilling location viable is already leased up. Then they can come to that landowner and say that we are going to force your property to become pooled in it. If this was to happen to you, they have absolutely no surface rights. They can't go on your property. They can't run pipelines on your property. They can't do anything. All they can do is you've got your property is in that pool with that. So you would get mineral rights the same as everybody else would get mineral rights based on the acreage that's in that unit. The other thing that you also get, if you happen to be forced pooled, is you also have the option to become an investor in that well, which wouldn't happen to anybody else. So if a company said, we're going to force pool your acreage, you can go to that company and say, okay, you may force pool me, I'm going to get my royalties, but I want to invest in this well. So if the well turns out it's a good well, you have the opportunity to increase your revenues there. Again, no pipelines on forced pool property. All that would be a right-of-way agreement, and a right-of-way agreement is going to generally be X amount of dollars a foot if you choose to have a pipeline run across it. If you say, nope, I don't want a pipeline on my property, they have to go around it. So it's not, it is an inconvenience, and I can see where it would irritate some people, but if they can't touch the surface of your property.
I think one of the things that's pretty true about our society is that communities and governments at every level have legislated and prohibited literally thousands and thousands of activities for the general welfare, and in fact even for the landowner themselves. For example, let's see, the county charges me, what, $2 to get rid of a tire? Let's say I want to make my $1 million, and I say, okay guys, I'll take them for $1 a piece. And so my 140 acres in Little Valley now is mounted up with tires. These are becoming pretty voluminous. I'm going to say, I can get rid of these, and I light them off. You know, there are laws against that. And there are good reasons why there are laws against that, because doing that kind of thing with my property affects my neighbors and affects my community. And a similar thing happens with fracking. I agree with Tim 100%. If things are done responsibly and it has no impact at all on your neighbors and your community, then a landowner should be able to decide what they can do. Although I also have this other conservation ethic that realizes that I'm not going to be the landowner forever, and that whoever owns the land in the future should not inherit messes that I made on that. But the question is, can fracking be done responsibly? Can you have hydraulic fracturing come in and not bother your neighbors with thousands of truck trips and not affect your community? And the studies are showing, no, you can't. Contamination doesn't stop at property lines. There are cases where, in fact, just 3 days ago, Range Resources is being sued for water contamination down in Pennsylvania. And added to the lawsuit is this landowner's neighbor that actually had the lease. because the landowner's neighbor didn't want the operations happening too close to their house, so they pushed it more towards their property line. Well, it pushed it closer to their neighbor's house, and so their neighbor is suing both Range Resources and their neighbor for water contamination because they were part of it as far as the decision making. Anyway, so there's all sorts of issues. I would agree that if it could be done perfectly responsibly, then sure. But with the failure rate of cement seals, with the numbers of water contaminations that we've seen, I think there's an inherent flaw in fracking. Our compulsory integration in New York State, and I think it's 60%, not 65%, to me, that is violating property rights. If I don't want fracking on my property, if I don't want the gas to be removed from down below because I have doubts about what's going to happen to water, I shouldn't have to. But the law now says that yes, if they can, within one drilling unit, get 60% of the people to be leased out, and they can adjust those drilling units so that they can get that 60%. And a drilling unit's what, Tim? Typically between 1 and 2 square miles? Then they take away the rights of that 40% of landowners.
Better than 60%.
I'm sorry, could we just clarify one thing? When in compulsory, from one pad, what's the radius then outward from that pad that it's likely to include if you have a pad?
Yeah, it's going to depend on the shape of the pad
Yeah.
and where it is, yeah.
Like, isn't
But
it
is there a
a half
number?
mile wide, 2 miles long?
Basically, a half mile wide and 2 miles long is generally.
It's 140 acres, isn't that?
No, this is different for the horizontal drilling. It's different.
Well, that's about a square mile, so yeah, that'd be about right. But again, what they're finding is they're extending laterals, because it costs a lot. I mean, part of me is very impressed with the technology. If you see the microseismometers, et cetera, they use, it's amazing stuff. But it costs a tremendous amount to drill a hydraulic fractured well, these new kind. It's $6-7 million per well. So what they're doing to make it more productive is they're increasing the length of the horizontal part. And as they do that, that's going to increase typically the size of the drilling unit, especially if they then add more wells to the pad, which increases the width of the drilling as well. Do I have that right?
Yeah, absolutely. The technology is advancing in all aspects of this. So, yeah, I think the lateral is now 7,000 feet. So, pretty standard.
Notes. Did you want to respond to Glenn's?
No, not really. I mean, yeah, it's just a difference.
Then we're going to take a break here for 10 minutes. And we'll reconvene in 10, and we'll go through the questions from the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And ask everybody to please have a seat, and we'll start going through our audience questions for the evening. Our first question: If a ban on drilling and fracking were to be passed, presumably in the town of Leon, are those who are against the gas industry willing to pay taxes for those who wanted to develop the gas resources, and are they willing to pay for the loss of income that the property could have generated? So I'm going to ask, turn that to Glenn first, and then come back to Tim.
Sure. Well, I guess in addition to fracking, there are tons of other types of things we could say we'd like to bring into the town of Leon, some of which are legal, some of which are illegal, and you could have the same kind of question. So, you know, I guess maybe the question really is fracking going to provide that kind of tax relief over the long term? And I would maintain that it doesn't. And I would maintain it doesn't as far as jobs and employment either, from some of the data that I've given you before. But I'll let Tim take the rest of that, because I think he might have a different opinion than me.
We're going to keep 1 minute on each side, just to make sure this goes quickly.
That's one of the things that the state of New York, Governor Cuomo was very adept at. I'm on the school board, so I had to deal with this man for a lot of reasons. What he said now is that you can't drill. So if it goes through and he says now, okay, it's okay to drill, but the townships that don't want it, you can ban it. The problem that that's going to prevent for a township is not in every circumstance, but there are circumstances where there's landowners that are going to rightfully be able to go to that township and say, you You have legislated away my right to get the resources off from my property. That's a taking. A government agency can't take from me without compensating me. So that's where a town board has to be very careful. If you do something and you say you can't do it, that you don't get caught up in that. That could turn out to be turn out to be tremendously expensive for a town board or a township to have to compensate somebody for that.
Tim, do you know of any taking lawsuits that have been successful?
There's been no taking lawsuits started in New York State yet because it's not officially banned, it's not regulated.
I mean in other states, because Pennsylvania has home rule like we do, and the townships that are banned fracking.
No, all I'm aware of is in New York State, and I do know that there's, the same as if the fracking is allowed, there's environmental groups that are going to sue over it, and there's also a large number of landowners that they're just waiting for that opportunity. Now, how successful it is, I don't know, but it is a possibility.
Okay.
Next question, gas wells, gas wells that are large are potential eyesores. Would our vacation areas be affected?
Whoever wrote this, I can show you a picture of the completed location. That's part of the socioeconomic things that you have to do in your permitting process is where you place the pads. That's one advantage to the horizontal drilling in the pads is before when you had a location, this is where you had to drill and this is where you had to drill. So now you have the ability to say, okay, well, instead of putting the well here, if we move the well back here behind, I don't know, a bunch of trees or whatever it is, you have the ability to move it and should be less of an issue.
Unless you live in redwood forest, there are no trees that can cover up the new kinds of drilling rigs. Go home and Google it and see what they look like. They're way, way, way bigger than they were before. Before we were talking about, well, if New York does open up, where would it happen? And the sweeter spots are around Binghamton for sure, but New York is already listed, I think it's, 12 or 16 permits that it's granting. These are already partial. And one of the things I do as part of a group is every month I go test water. Dutch Hollow Creek in the town of Ellery and Bemis Creek near Bemis Point to run baseline tests so that if fracking does open up. And the reason why I picked those two streams, even though they're quite a drive for me, is that two of the wells, there's two in Chautauqua County, two in Cattaraugus County. The two in Chautauqua County are up on that hill across from Chautauqua Lake. There's no way, not that I think that rigs being an eyesore are a big issue in this, but there's no way you're going to hide them. Because they'd be right out there, and people from Chautauqua Institution would see them, people from all over the lake would see them. But again, I don't think it's a big deal as far as being an eyesore. There's bigger problems.
The drilling process, they've got it down to about 45 days that you have to rig it down. So absolutely, when the rig's there, yeah, you're definitely going to have something you're going to see. When you're finished, not so much. And also, like Glenn said before, there's certain economics that come into play here. Somebody that's got 2 wells permitted in Chautauqua County certainly isn't going to invest the money to horizontally drill and frack 2 wells. So those permits, for all practical purposes, useless because of the economic conditions.
Okay. Number 3, have the polluting chemicals I'm presuming in the fracking fluid that contaminate the groundwater, have they been removed? I believe is what they're asking here.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm.
So-
Otherwise, they can light their water.
Well,
I don't.
There's places in Fredonia you can light your water too. Not every place that you see pictures of flaming faucets as a result of fracking. A good example of that is the Gasland film, if anybody saw that, and the end of that where they lit that up. There was also an interview where they interviewed Josh Fox, and they said, you were aware when you made this documentary that this person had this problem before there was any fracking? He says that's immaterial. So to say that, you know, to say that all gas, gas that you have in your, in water is because of fracking, not true. Not saying that some people don't have some trouble, not saying that it can't be an issue. As far as,
We're asking about
yeah, okay. As far as chemicals, the chemicals that are going to go in it are going to get pumped down a well. There's 1, 2, 3, at least 3 layers of steel, 4 layers of cement. Goes down, comes back up into sealed containers. Barring a disaster or something happening, none of those chemicals. And another thing to remember about your chemicals, there's a lot of the chemicals, but if you had a tanker of return flowback fluid, just like you see a truck that you see filling up at a gas, or filling a gas station tanks, a tanker of that size, if you took that flowback fluid, for the percentage of chemicals that are in there, 15 gallons of that tanker would be chemicals. The rest of it would be water. So it's still, obviously, it's not anything that I want poured on my ground, but it's not some seething toxic thing that you look at and your eyes are going to fall out of either. It's been over-exaggerated.
Yeah, getting back to the methane for a minute. Methane technically is not a contaminant. And Tim's right, a lot of water naturally has methane in it, but that doesn't mean that drilling doesn't reduce it. In fact, a study by Duke University, it's one of the first studies I read on this whole topic, showed that the closer a water well was to a hydrofracking well, the greater the likelihood that there was methane in it and the greater the concentration of the methane, including up to explosive concentrations of these things. But again, if you have methane in your water, usually you can mitigate it. You can have an air stripper, you can have ways to get the methane out before it enters your house. It's not the methane so much that's the problem. In addition to methane being found in water, another study by the University of Texas at Arlington found the same exact kind of correlation, but with arsenic, selenium, heavy metals, and other chemicals. These aren't chemicals that were put down there, but they're chemicals that were brought up. Because when you put chemicals down into a well, into rock, that's a dynamic situation. And you get a lot of chemical reactions. You get things that were toxic in the rock beforehand being leached out and concentrated and brought up. The statement that Tim made about, everything's contained with steel and cement and containers, if that was true, I would not be sitting here tonight and I wouldn't have spent all this time trying to fight this thing. The fact of the matter is that the solid rock is perforated by a wellbore, and if that wellbore has a bad cement job, then contaminants can go up. And they don't have to go up all the way to the top. All rock has natural fractures and joints in it, and they sometimes will intercept a lateral fracture and find their way to somebody's water supply. That's happened hundreds and hundreds of times. And I think another question in the future is going to speak more specifically to that. So, can the chemicals be removed? Not from a whole aquifer, not easily. It takes centuries to clean aquifers. Can it be removed from a well? Usually not. Usually they bring in water, or if you are within a reasonable range from the municipal water supply, you'll get hooked up to that perhaps. But yeah, there are people whose water wells have been ruined by this process, and they're still ruined. Sometimes it's temporary, sometimes it's permanent.
Thank you, Lynn. This is addressed to Tim, but I'm going to ask both people to please respond. Why do taxes decrease in communities where there's a high volume of horizontal hydrofracking?
Because oil and gas companies are taxed on production. So the state has a formula: you produce X amount of gas, each 1,000 feet of gas you produce has a value to it, and that gets submitted to the townships and counties. So we have tax bills on every one of the wells that's based off from production. The more the well produces, the more MCFs, the higher the value as well, and that's the way they generate their tax rates. So strictly production.
Tim covered that fine.
And this was a question that was a duplicate, so I think several of you asked a similar. What is the depth of hydrofracked horizontal well? You're asking about the depth of the well.
Well, I think around here, I believe 7,000 feet is approximately.
Yeah, it depends. One of the misconceptions, a lot of people think that conventional drilling is always shallow and this new hydrofracking is always deeper. Some people think it's the opposite, but there's really no correlation. The Medina sandstone, which is typically what a lot of conventional wells are drilled into for gas in this area, there are other formations, but that's the typical one, is actually part way between the Marcellus, which is the younger black shale that they would hydrofrack, and the Utica shale. We ought to mention that the Marcellus shale in our area is too thin. It's probably not feasible. It's only 20, 30 feet thick. However, the Utica shale is 300 feet thick, and certainly economically would be a viable layer to hit. But that's deeper than the Medina that they have traditionally hit for conventional. So really the depth of the well doesn't correlate at all to whether it's a conventional or unconventional type of drilling. Does that make sound right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah.
Do you have any other comments?
No,
Have you
that's,
an opportunity?
that's it.
Sixth question, and we've got about, I think 12 together, so we're halfway through here. What is the advantage or disadvantage of the town of Leon passing a law banning fracking? And I'll ask Glenn to start that one.
Okay, at the beginning of my talk, I listed several reasons why, even if you're for fracking, you should ban it. A couple of other ones that I didn't have time to mention is that, as Tim's been talking about the regulations, and we've been discussing this, I think one thing that you understand is the longer that this goes on, the better regulations are getting. If a town were to ban fracking, and as I've said, over 180 towns in New York State have done that, one of the benefits it gives them is that if fracking opens up in New York State, they can sit back, have it happen somewhere else, have the regulations get evolved and refined as we see what problems might be unique to New York State, and then they would benefit if later on they did open up to fracking. I'm not saying that they should open up to fracking, but you know, that would certainly be a benefit in the long run. One of the other things, and the main point I'll reiterate, is the price. There are a lot of people in Pennsylvania that are getting royalties that end up not being very much because of the low price of gas now. Or I should say not as much as they could be getting if they had waited. It's just like that gold in the attic kind of an idea. So I think that's most of it.
Yeah, it's like Glenn mentioned earlier. He said you ought to wait. Prices should be up in a couple of years. That's what we anticipate. The state of New York, even once the homeowner says it's okay, your permitting process is well over a year. They're not going to start here. Your price is going to, your price is going to be up, so I consider that to be kind of a moot point. If the price is low and the economics aren't there to drill a well, they're not going to drill the well. It's just not going to happen. Another reason that I would say that a ban isn't going to matter, it's not going to help a town, because you're banning something that you can't do anyway. You're not giving yourself any more protection. You're not anything, because once the permitting process, even somebody almost says it's okay to drill and come in here, they have to start communicating with the township. So you're going to know a year in advance that somebody's planning on doing this. So if you want to put a ban or you want to have some restrictions in, you're going to know better what's going on. If they start drilling in the center of the state and they do it and they don't have problems, or they do have problems, if you design a ban or regulations that are going to reflect the issues that have shown up. Since all this stuff has happened, it used to be the open pits for the flowback water were the standard. It's not the standard anymore. You used to truck water to the sites. You pipe water to the sites anymore. Recycling the fluids, using them over again on the wells. These are all things that have changed since they've talked about having a ban. Penn State is working in a process to use glass to make the proppants instead of mining the sand. That's another thing that's going to happen. The number of chemicals and additives that they put in the fracking process is decreasing because they're learning what they have to do, what they can get away with not having in there. It's not necessary. You don't need to have that extra chemical load in there. There's the technology is developing so quickly in these. They've even in Ohio now, they've fracked wells with absolutely no water. It's a new process that they're working on and they're going through it. So you're getting asked to pass a ban on something that can't happen for years, where the technology is just, it's amazing how quickly it's progressing. So the logic is saying make a ban to stop doing something that you can't do anyway, and ban what you don't know they're going to be doing when it's time to do it. It just doesn't happen.
And I would obviously disagree with that, because if New York opens up, one of the things that's going to happen right away is a lot of those old leases are going to be flipped. The big companies that are into fracking and can afford to do it and have cadres of lawyers and accountants and so on. This is funny, we're kind of arguing opposite. I'm arguing to Tim that his industry is very efficient and can get things done pretty quickly, and he's arguing that no, we're not, and it's going to take years. So I think a ban is prudent. You can always rescind it if you decide to later, but there are many reasons, whether you're for or against fracking, that a ban would be a good idea.
Is that fair, gentlemen?
Yeah, just, you know, the time frame is, it's not something that we've made up. It's, if you look at the regulations, you look at all the permits, you look at all the studies that you have to do, everything that you have to do, that is going to be the time frame for getting everything put together to drill a well in New York State. It's not my imagination. It's a fact.
And did the person who asked that question, they feel like you got an answer? Is that clear enough? Some question. Are there independent studies underlined regarding real facts not biased for or against fracking? I have my own opinion about that. I have a hard time assessing what an independent study is.
I've been to how many of these sort of things that we've done, and this, I think, personally, I think has been the best format that we've come up with. I mean, you're hearing from both sides of the issue, and there's not a bunch of people. This is what a lot of people would benefit from, is this type of exchange of ideas. You're not going to go on the internet, and you're not going to find a middle road. You're going to find pro-fracking, anti-fracking, pro-windmill, it's just, that's not the place that you're going to go and find your information.
And I would agree with Tim that there's both a lot of real information and a lot of misinformation about this topic, like there are so many other topics, but I would disagree in that, and maybe it's my bias as a science person, that there are ways of knowing things and knowing what's fact and what isn't. And that if you go out and you are taking measurements and collecting data and interpreting that data, et cetera, that you can find out that yes, as you get closer to drilling proximity, you get more methane in your well, you get more arsenic, et cetera. You know, there's studies that just came out, one came out last week. David Carpenter from SUNY Albany did a study of Arkansas, Colorado, Pennsylvania, Wyoming, Ohio, air sampling. Found 8 chemicals in the air from drilling and fracking operations. I'm not saying it would necessarily happen if, you know, New York did this, but this is pretty typical. And some of these are carcinogens, benzene found at 5 orders of magnitude. That's hundreds of thousands of times over the limit. And so, yeah, I mean, to me, I accept that kind of study because it's peer-reviewed. They show their methodology. You know, it's not where they are making stuff up. So I think there are ways to know facts about this. I get a lot of my facts from the industry. I go to their websites and I find information that they've gathered because of the way they've collected it. So it depends how you get your information. But I strongly believe that, yeah, we can glean the real information from the misinformation. And that's one way.
Just a quick response to that. That's the problem with a lot of the studies. You can go for these studies, and you can also go on there and find some of the different set of professors. Is it not that the study was flawed? I just read one earlier this week from I think it was in Denver. A group of professors had analyzed frack water from, you know, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, 5 or 6 different states, and came to the conclusion that it was really nothing in it that was any big deal, and if you had it dumped in your yard, well, it wasn't going to matter much. Yeah, I'm in the industry, I don't believe that. But it was a study that was done by people, and the same as Glenn said, it was people with titles behind their name, and somebody that didn't know better would read that. And I'm sure there's more to it than what was in the article that I looked at, but that's what makes it so hard. Just because somebody with credentials behind their name has come out with the study, you dig long enough and you're going to find some other people with credentials that saying, yeah, it was a flawed study, or so it's very hard.
Right, and that's why you have to make sure if you're reading from a journal that it has to be peer reviewed. There are actually some journals that sound quite sciencey, where any author can submit any research and they pay the journal to publish it. So there's a lot of false science going on out there. But if you find a good peer-reviewed journal, and where people have looked at it, the scientific community has looked at it, accepted it, because if it turns out it's bad information, it gets redacted. If it's not, it stands. And so I look at the stuff that stands.
Okay. Leon does not have a planning board, is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay. To determine plans for township and its residents, who would decide which specifications would be applied to control hydrofracking if a ban was imposed and then later lifted with restrictions? So I think this is a question for governance, and I'm going to turn this out to somebody in the audience.
I can speak to it for a second.
Okay.
I think one of the things that's important to recognize with these bans is New York State itself, as a state entity, has the power to regulate. A town like Leon does not have the power to regulate. They can prohibit or they can allow, but they can't regulate it. And so that's why the language of bans, like, I've talked to Tim before privately, and one of my frustrations is these 180 towns that have bans, some of them have bans that the language is so loose that when you read it, it's obvious it's banning conventional drilling and fracking as well as the new kind of unconventional. And that's why a lot of the new bans have language specific, so it's banning just the new kind and not the old kind. Because one of the things I don't want to do is have towns get a ban and then run poor Tim's company out of business. They should still be able to do conventional drilling and fracking.
Does that help?
If somebody else wants to chime in.
Yeah, if anyone wanted to stand and address, because the question was more about local governance. Who would decide what specifications?
Well, my question, from what I've gathered, the regulations would fall under the state. Whatever drilling you do, you gotta follow the state regulations. On the roads.
Correct.
That's the S guy.
No. The roads still remain under the strict control of local. The state can't override what the local. If you wanted to come into the town of Leon and post all your roads for 5 tons per axle, you're entirely within your right to do that. Like Glenn said, what you're not allowed to do is you're not allowed to say, you're allowed to drill a well and frack this well, but only use 500,000 gallons of water. You can't dictate that. But there are other things that you can do that essentially shuts it down if you don't want it to happen. The 5 tons per axle. I mean, there's that kind of thing that you can put in there that it's entirely within your legal rights to do. But what you can't do is you can't regulate how a well is drilled.
Correct, but you have to follow the state's mandated regulations on your pad, on improving the roads, on
Correct.
the way you've explained it.
Yes.
You have to follow the state's mandate.
Yes.
The state regulation package, the second draft was the SGIES. And that's the document that he's referring to, the 1,500-page document
Correct.
of state regulations. And that would be required for every, is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's part of the reason, like I'm saying, if you all of a sudden the township thought, oh my gosh, they're going to drill these wells and this is horrid. That's all you got to do is have your road supervisor come into a town board meeting and say, hey, let's let's post the roads at 5 tons per axle, and hey, done deal.
Okay, I'm going to move along to the last two questions here. Talked about short-term jobs for $80,000 a year for 2 years, or 80 for 6 or 8. Which would you choose? I'm not sure if I understand this question, but you're asking if someone could help me.
I'll tell you, you take 6 or 8 years, you make $80,000 around here. If you can make it in 2 years, which one are you going to choose? Then you can take the other 4 years and make 10 or 15, and who's ahead?
It's a fair question. I'm going to turn it over to both of our panelists.
It isn't rocket science, it's a simple thing. It's just like you said about businesses. Well, if we can open the Lean Grill for 7 days a week, and she makes $200,000 in a week, or a year, instead of 10 years, which one?
Got it. I mean, my own viewpoint on that is that in any excuse me, sir, in any decision,
You want to throw me out?
guys, we got the question asked and clarified.
To say his answer.
He did.
He was
We're all
called
set.
on.
We're all cleared. We know
He wasn't
exactly.
done.
We know exactly what he's asking, and we're going to answer it. Anyhow, so I think the idea is that with any decision you make, is it always just one factor?
That's real fair.
When you're deciding to do something or not doing something, is it only one factor? If it's only money, if it's only money, yeah, it makes it easy. But there's a lot of other factors in this as well as every other decision. Would we agree?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
We're living in a poverty state here,
Right.
especially in this town. I mean, there is nothing here.
Well, here, let me toss out something for you, because PA, even though they have different regulations, you know, we hear good things about their economics. PA from 2011 to 2013, which was their big drilling boom, right? And it's decreased since then, but that was their big boom. Pennsylvania is dead last as far as job creation in the nation for that. If you graph their unemployment, yeah, their unemployment has come down, but it doesn't match the drilling at all. It matches the national economic situation. So I haven't seen where Pennsylvania has prospered as much from fracking as a lot of people say they do because of that. And so, pardon me if I'm dubious about that situation.
It's a short-term thing, I understand that.
Right, we got that. Okay, let's get Tim's idea.
But my only comment to, you know, okay, you know the jobs that are created and people are working in Pennsylvania due to fracking. So you know they're employed. So if you don't frack and these people aren't working, they're unemployed because of fracking. Pennsylvania would be worse off employment-wise if they didn't have it.
Mm-hmm. And then there's always the question, what else can we do? Buffalo's getting the largest solar panel manufacturing factory in the world, 3,000 jobs. You know, we can do other things as well.
And Buffalo also has a steel plant that's manufacturing pipe for well production. And we also have somebody that made all their money in the oil and gas and the shales that's bought the Sabres and bought the Bills and built the Harbor Center. All that money is absolutely 100% because of shale drilling.
Thank you. How many jobs would this possibly create, full-time or part-time? And I'll start with Tim. Give an estimate.
Yeah, I
You have some
guess
estimates working
that's really going to be tough because it's all going to depend on the volume of drilling. You know, I guess I don't really know how to answer that. You know, obviously if you have 5 rigs running, it's different than if somebody comes in with 2 rigs. When you get done, you're going to have the people that are going to be there working to build the locations while they're drilling. Absolutely most of the drilling to begin with, there's going to be people that would come in from out of town that already have the experience. Hopefully you get local people that come on and learn and gain experience. So you're going to have that. Once that's done, you're going to have people that are going to have to maintain the facility. You're going to have the local unions are going to have the jobs to run all the pipelines. You've got a compressor facility that you have to build. you know, all that, you have to maintain the facility, you have to maintain the pipelines. I guess it really just depends on the volume of the work. I don't know how I would come up with that.
Sure, there's no doubt that it creates jobs. The question is, does it create as many as a lot of people say it does? Both West Virginia and Ohio are fairly heavily fracked. Would you agree? Ohio not as much, perhaps. The direct jobs in the oil and gas industry is less than 1% of their workforce. In Pennsylvania, 1.7% of the new industrial jobs, not new jobs everywhere, but just new industrial jobs, just 1.7% of them were directly with the fracking industry. Now, there are a lot of other things that get boosted up when fracking comes in, motels, restaurants, etc., for a while. But, you know, I still maintain that through the studies I made that it's not as good as people say it is, and certainly not as long-lasting. And definitely, yes, it's something, but it's not as much.
It's 300,000 jobs in Pennsylvania, 200,000 jobs in Ohio.
It's still under a percent. It's still under a percent.
Still, Glenn's right, it's still under 1%, but I will guarantee you that 300,000, 200,000 are happy that they're working, not on the unemployment rolls.
Exactly.
Is it possible that hydrofracking permits would allow us to help improve our roads? I'm sort of changing the question a little bit to try to clarify.
Yeah, once again, that's, you get down and you talk to the township supervisors in Pennsylvania, that's the standard. If you, it just makes sense, if you've got a location where you want to develop, put in a $50 million development and the township road's not up to snuff to handle the traffic or a bridge or whatever, they rebuild the road, they replace the roads, they do it for the county. It's standard.
And because it's my job, I'll also counter that by saying that road damage is done as well. During the process of the drilling and fracking, you are still, even with the recycling they're doing, talking about thousands and thousands of truck trips. And that does have an impact. Whether they fix the roads afterwards or not, that's up to the town to negotiate carefully beforehand.
And that's why you would require a bond from anybody that went on your roads. If they damaged your roads, they get fixed. You don't fix the road, you don't get your bond
We're
back.
going to wind down to the last couple of questions here. How many towns have contaminated their water? Or have contaminated water, I guess?
It's hard to say as far as towns. And it's even hard to say total. You go down into heavily fracked areas in Pennsylvania and you just roam around the back roads, you'll see a lot of water buffaloes on people's lawns. And those are people that have had wells that have had damage of one kind or another. And the company is giving them water buffaloes to supply their water. And the water buffaloes, they're plastic containers for water. We're not talking about the animal. And the DEP in Pennsylvania sadly doesn't even keep track of contaminations. They don't have a way to filter that out. But a newspaper in Pennsylvania went through and finally got the DEP to release data of 243 cases of contamination. Many of these cases involve multiple wells, an aquifer or a small aquifer that many families were feeding off of, and it contaminated all of those wells. So does it exist? For sure. Is it every single water well that's in an area where drilling takes place? Does that get contaminated? No, no way. But it's definitely a spin of the roulette wheel. And I know from my 140 acres, I would never allow it to be fracked. To me, it's too great of a risk when you're talking about that high percentage of gas.
Yeah, as far as having water wells, there's setbacks that are in place in New York State that weren't in place in Pennsylvania. Once again, the regulations for what you have to do, the extra layers of steel, cement, containment. It's awful close to comparing what it would take you to buy a handgun in Texas to buying a handgun in New York State. That ain't the same thing, folks. Same difference with your fracking, same difference with your regulations. You're comparing things that happened in apples and oranges.
Okay. And last question, who's overseeing the drilling operations, the DEC or EPA? You give a fairly long list of regulated
Both.
agencies.
They're both involved. You have air permits that you have to do for the EPA. You have to record any emissions you have of methane. That's all standard. DEC is going to be involved from, well, I mentioned probably like 8 different actually divisions of the DEC are involved in it. Public Service Commission definitely is going to have their hands in it. In New York State, yeah, there's a lot of different government agencies want a piece of it. Well, and part of the reason that they want is their own self-preservation, because with the way everybody's cutting government right now, if the agency, the DOT was one that we first started looking at all this stuff. The DOT was one that they came up with phenomenal numbers of extra people that they said they needed to have on if this was going to happen. And then as you got to looking into it, the reason that they did that is they were going, oh wait, if we don't do anything, it's the same thing with the minerals division or wherever you want. Unless you can come up with a reason for existing in government, they're going to cut your numbers. So that's why you have so many different divisions of the DEC and everybody, forestry. They all want a piece of it so that they can say, hey, we need to keep our personnel here. There's definitely a factor in it on all of it.
It's hard to predict something that hasn't happened yet, this new situation. I've read through the SGEIS for New York State. I'll skim some of the 1,500 pages. I haven't read it all thoroughly, but it's hard to predict whether that's going to take care of it or not. And to me, it's one of those things where we can say, yeah, it's going to take care of all this, and then we find that it hasn't. Because I keep falling back on every single state has said, oh yeah, we have the strictest regulations. We're very stringent. And every state has problems. And would New York be the first state that doesn't have problems? I doubt it. Because no matter what the DEC regulates, you're not going to change that 6% and up of cement failures. That's been fairly constant. In fact, that's actually gone up. There's a lot of things about fracking that to many people are inherently flawed, and I think that's one reason why you've seen literally hundreds and hundreds of countries, states, provinces, cities, counties, towns, etc. banning it. They think there is an inherent problem with it that no amount of regulations can fix. And that's why I think having an extra layer of protection is always good.
Would you like a response?
Yeah, part of the regulations, when you read through the SGEIS regulations, that it's leaving the regulators the ability to adapt to changes and to, if there's an issue that comes up, to respond to it, change regulations, improve regulations. So I can assure you, just from the vertical wells, they're doing that right now. There's a whole bunch of new regulations that are coming through. They figured they needed to toughen things up, and probably is the right course for them. So it's not like they're rigid and this is going to be it, and it's going to be, oh well, it doesn't work, and yeah, we don't care about doing the right thing. It's not where they're at.
And call me skeptical, but I've seen too many times when the government said, oh yeah, we can cover this, we know what we're doing, and it hasn't worked out. I just sounded kind of right-wing there, didn't I?
Yeah, you did. Congratulations.
I want to thank everybody and thank our very patient audience and our two organizers. And thank you, Tim and Glenn.
Good job.
Yes, thank you.